Life before the actions of third parties was very, very different from what we experience today. Along with slavery, child labor, absolute criminal worker abuse, women were chattel under the law and had no rights as persons whatsoever. Our constitutional framers enfranchised only white, land-owning, church-going men. Every attempt to ameliorate these grievous wrongs was blocked by those in power. The demands of the people were called unrealistic and impossible to implement, very much as our president has said of single-payer health care. That is, while admittedly the best system, it would be impossible in today's political climate to put into place. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? What is required today is just exactly what made the historical changes in the past. The third parties organized themselves around the abolition of slavery, a minimum wage, women's right to vote, Social Security, an end to child labor, and the 40-hour work week. The challenges third parties made to the established political powers were fought every step of the way, sometimes brutally. But the struggle continued, and the people won. Then as now, the established parties were so deeply vested in and dependent on the privileged few that they could not, would not, do what they knew was right. The struggles are not over. The UN Charter, written almost 70 years ago, called for the human right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services. So that was recognized 70 years ago. You can see how far we've gotten. We have made huge advances in technology. I mean, the technology is just mind-blowing. The powerful have gotten wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. And they are now using their wealth to push back on the gains that were so hard won. In Texas, women are losing their right to control their own bodies. I don't know if you've read about that wonderful that wonderful piece of legislation brought to you by the people who don't want intrusive government. Bills have been introduced in our legislature to weaken child labor laws. Candidate Gingrich proposed putting poor children to work as janitors in schools without any fear whatsoever of being booed off or yanked off or blown off the platform. The lesser of two evils still does evil. As long as we continue to validate their power with our votes, they will continue to serve their contributors with deep pockets and shallow consciences. Contributors are no longer even people, but legal fictions with almost unlimited resources. The Green Party accepts no corporate money. Our platform, health care for all, a clean environment, a secure living wage, racial and sexual equality, and security built on peace and justice, and an end to corrupt elections. 2 years ago, or 2 elections ago, Dennis Kucinich proposed similar planks for the Democratic platform. I was excited when all of his proposals passed in our local Democratic caucus, and I was thrilled when they were approved without dissent in our senatorial convention, which is Pasadena, Texas. Now, I don't think there's any place more conservative than Pasadena, Texas. And these things flew by. There wasn't even an objection, just approval, approval, approval. They passed. I was even more hopeful when they passed the state convention. All of them went right through. They died at the national level. Of course. And then no more was heard of them. I vowed never to vote Democratic again. And then I was seduced by Obama's promises. I was one of those who wept for joy when he was elected. I will not make that mistake again. We have a vehicle to make a difference. The difference that is so badly needed. We have tried reason, we've tried pleading, we've written letters, we've tried organizing, and we have tried demonstrating. Now let us use the only option left to us, the ballot, and the power of the ballot. Join in creating an effective force in 2012 to make health care for all a reality. I find it difficult to speak the convictions of my heart because I was raised a nice little girl who didn't offend anybody. And I'm afraid for a lot of you, these remarks about how you have to do something different because what we're doing isn't working. Might be offensive, but there it is. I'm a target, you have it. Thank you.
Don Beckler. Come on down.
Thank you. My name is Don Beckler. I chair Single Payer Now in California. I want to make 3 points. 1, movements make change, not necessarily politicians. 2, never stop advocating for what you believe in as a single payer activist, no matter how bad the argument is against for the lesser evil candidate. And the last thing I want to say is, in this coming year, have a concrete plan of how you're going to build your group or our movement. Have a quantifiable plan of how you're going to approach the coming year. First, on movements make social change. I sort of cut my teeth on the anti-Vietnam War movement. Who was the president that signed the Paris Peace Accords to end the Vietnam War? You're old enough to know this.
Nixon.
There you go, Nixon. President Nixon. There's the argument for electing a Republican. So, I mean, he also normalized relationships with China. OSHA. Roe versus Wade. No, I mean Roe. I mean HMOs.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a number of things. Anyway.
Look what you started.
Look what I started, right? Voice proud of you. Okay. So, I mean, if you think, and a lot of you are old enough to remember this. What years were the big anti-war demonstrations in? They were in the odd numbered years, 67, 69, 71, 73. In the election years, in the even years, there was always a split in the movement with people going towards spending a lot of their energies in the Democratic Party or whatever party, and versus going out into the streets and building a movement. But I will contend it was the social movement that ended the Vietnam War. You can't. That's what did it. Maybe a demoralized U.S. Army and a tough resistance from the Vietnamese. But it was the thing we can work on is a building a strong social movement. The second point is, and this is a perennial debate that always goes on. And you know, when we're all going to be, you all have to make a choice how you're going to approach the coming year. It's always, this is my 12th presidential cycle or something I've been involved in, right? And it's always the most important historic election in the history of the world. It always is, and you're going to hear this. And we have to elect whoever, otherwise Attila the Hun will come around the corner and we'll all be gobbled up by some awful thing. Oh, and the other argument you're going to hear, you'll always hear at every election cycle, and somebody in the Supreme Court's going to die, and we want to be able to appoint someone who's like for the people. You know, and I just don't quite buy into this stuff. This thing. So, I don't believe, so, you know, candidates who are actively supporting single payer, that's one thing. But then there's this other brand of candidates that are sort of like, you know, I think that person's really with us and we should get them elected. I just am not a believer in closet good guys. It's like it's either on your literature or it's not. It's either on your website or it's not. It's either, you know, it's part of your stump speech or it's not. And I have no time to be hustling for candidates who don't say what are supporting single payer health care. The last thing I want to just talk about is there's policy and there's organizing. And I actually think organizing is almost more important than the policy piece of it. I mean, a lot of us can give good arguments in the policy and, you know, and have read all the Don McCann quotes of the day and read all the literature and so forth. But the real task is organizing. So, Single Payer Now, we're very specific about this stuff. We have a very concrete plan, and that is we try to get 100 people a week in our database. if someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, I want to give a good speech," and as part of our group, I say, "So how many names did you come back with?" Because to me, that's the mark of how good you were, not some subjective thing. It's, are you organizing? Half of your speech is about organizing and convincing the people in an audience to go out and to do more organizing. That's what it's all about. So that's our little organizing specific task. In California, sooner or later, everything ends up on the ballot. If we pass legislation in Sacramento, the bad guys will go put it on the ballot to overturn it. And if we don't pass it in Sacramento, then we have to organize a massive campaign to get 4 million voters to vote for our legislation. So our organization is kind of set up to build a database of 1 million people at some time. We're only at 19,000 now, but the curve sometimes can go like that. And in an initiative process, the tasks you need are to have thousands of people who feel comfortable talking to their neighbors about single-payer health care. So we're constantly trying to find ways to get more people to feel comfortable about talking about this. They're in the back table. We have these postcards as our most valuable tool. And the postcards say, "Dear Governor Brown, please pass our state bill. It'll save X amount of dollars and it'll get the insurance companies out of our lives." And so we ask people all the time to go out here, take 10 postcards, and go out and talk to your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, and get them to sign this. Okay? And then we have, once in a while we turn them into to the legislators in our state capitol. But the real important thing that's going on is that there's a conversation with an advocate, one of us, with someone who doesn't know about that. That conversation over taking a specific act makes us engage in a conversation. If we don't know something, we go home that night and look it up, or you ask somebody, "Wait, how do you answer that question? Is workers' compensation covered in this bill or not?" It's like, and you become a better advocate. And so we're always trying to develop that. We have hundreds of people who go out and collect postcards on a regular basis. And the other thing you need is, we think you need lots of people who are not weary about making personal phone calls to human beings. So we're always we have lots of people making phone calls all the time in this question. Anyway, we have certain goals like that. So I'm just saying, have a work plan this year to make your group better. There'll be a lot of us who will be, maybe not in this room, a lot of people are going to be diverted away from working on single payer this year because they want to go work on an election. I will contend that doesn't necessarily build a movement. If we can, Healthcare Now has a database of, Jeff, help me, 60,000? Could we have 100,000 by the end of the year? Well, if we all work on single payer, we can. But if we get diverted a little bit, it won't grow. So that's my thing, is have a very concrete plan on how to proceed about this. In conclusion, I'm weary of arguments that talk about we're doing this to make America competitive in the world, or we're doing this for business, and I just don't know if capitalism works. I bet I have some sympathetic allies in this. And so I'm not sure how this is going to necessarily play out. It's America. Someone's giving a speech today. America can do better than staying in the social system we have now. I'm not sure how this is going to play out, but this is what I do know. We as advocates for universal health care with a single-payer financing system, we are trying to win people over and change to a very compassionate society, no matter what system we have. This is a movement about compassion and about love, and it says, you want your neighbor to have health care, and you want somebody else to have. We all want to be in this boat together. We're fighting for a specific goal, but we're also fighting for values that we all endear as part of the human species. So, movements build social change. Don't get diverted from bird-dogging the candidates and let's not pester them on that thing. That'll help them lose the election if we mention single payer. Have a concrete plan, a measurable concrete plan to build your group to last year. And thank you all. We're in this together to build a more compassionate world. Thank you.
Don, and now we'll welcome Tim.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning. It's great to be here. I'm, like many of you, I find at these conferences some of the best organizing goes out in the hallways, and I just want to thank everybody last night, and what a great session, and again to acknowledge Katie and the passing of the torch, and to be here today, and thank all of you for being up so early at 9 o'clock for what sometimes can be a fun topic on how to organize on an election season. What I'd like to do in my 7 minutes is talk a little bit concretely about those things where we have agreement as a group today. While some of us may disagree on whether a Green Party, Third Party, or Democratic Party, I'm going to try to find those things in the next 6 minutes we can agree on and leave here together to work together. Deb's analysis of the Democratic Party I don't disagree with. We're Progressive Democrats of America. We are the insurgency. We are the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, or we like to say within the Congressional Progressive Caucus, we're the progressive wing of the Progressive Caucus. Because when it gets down to it at the end of the day, many of you can testify, as those of you struggling on the single-payer issue, when you go to Congress, there are very few friends. PDA was formed in 2004 as an offshoot of the Dennis Kucinich's presidential campaign. Like many of you in this room who worked in Dennis's campaign, others who worked on Howard Dean, we knew that we weren't necessarily going to win in 2004. We were realistic enough to know. But what we do know, and what we did know then, was that there would be a movement inside our party to put the Democratic Party back on track, to be the party that FDR promised us and the party that Harry Truman promised us. A party that would be committed to single payer, to getting out of Afghanistan and Iraq at that time, and now Afghanistan, but Iraq at that time, and to repeal the Patriot Act. So while John Kerry was accepting the nomination, many of us who were disappointed, Deb said, and all those resolutions that passed, what happened to him? Well, what happened to him was the night that Kerry was getting the nomination, 1,000 folks gathered at Roxbury Community College to launch Progressive Democrats of America. And at that conference, the very first speaker was John Conyers. The very first piece of legislation we talked about was 676. So by way of introduction, that's a little bit about who we are and separating us out from the Democratic Party. Now, what can we do in an election cycle that we don't do normally? As Don said, we're always about building the movement. Progressive Democrats of America is part of the larger social movement, like all of us. Our goal within Progressive Democrats of America is to link up with those of you that are doing the good work and the hard work on the ground. Candidates this election season, I couldn't agree more with what's been said. We don't have enough time to be working for candidates on the IFCOM. We have to search out those candidates that are with us now. It has to be about the issues first, and then we can find the candidates, and the candidates will come to us. What I want to do this morning is just introduce you to 2 people. Hopefully you've heard of them, and I'm going to take your challenge on reading campaign literature right now. How many of you are in the greater Chicago area are in the room? Anybody? Dr. Gill. Do you know Dr. Gill?
Yeah.
Does everybody in the room know Dr. Gill? Those of you who don't know Dr. Gill, he's running again for Congress in the Chicago area. He's a member of PNHP. His literature is being passed around to you right now. What I'd like to do is just read the last line on his literature to take on Don's challenge. For 20 years, I've been a member of Physicians for National Healthcare Program. When I am elected to Congress, I will advocate for improved Medicare for all, a program that will increase access and lower overhead costs while giving 100% of Americans quality medical coverage and access. He's a member of PNHP. There's a candidate that's been vetted for you to give some consideration for. Part of the frustration is, well, I can't work for Dr. Gill because I live in Chicago, right? Wrong. There's no such thing as a legislative district anymore. This is the 21st century. You can work for Dr. Gill right from your kitchen table. You can contact his campaign. You can download phone calls, make contributions, and help his campaign. The other candidate I want to just quickly introduce you to, if you haven't already, Progressive Democrats of America has worked very closely with Healthcare Now and with Katie's leadership over the course of the last couple of years at Healthcare Now. We've shared with you our Healthcare Not Warfare campaign. And many of you were ambushed, probably got your stickers yesterday. But by way of introduction, that campaign was launched to find an intersection. Again, how can we get out of our silos? How can we work as single-payer advocates and reach outside of our organizational identities and reach across organizations and build our social movement? As Don said, that's the challenge. 4 years ago, on the anniversary of the Iraq invasion, rather than simply doing a demonstration on calling out the president for an illegal, immoral war and for the reduction and withdrawal of all U.S. troops in an orderly fashion, we began to reach out with the single-payer movement to bring together what we call healthcare, not warfare. What are the true costs of the military engagements that are costing us, not only in human terms, but economic terms? That was the Healthcare Not Warfare campaign, and for the last 2 years, every month, we've been standing out in front of congressional offices with that sign you see right there. So when Don says we have to get out of our comfort zone and we have to talk to people and build our list, what better way than to take a sign like that and stand in the middle of your town and ask people to join you? That's what Healthcare Not Warfare was about. The three co-chairs of that campaign were somebody you probably heard of, Congressman John Conyers, somebody else you might have heard of, Donna Smith, and Norman Solomon. Norman Solomon was part of the Healthcare Not Warfare campaign. Norman Solomon is now running for Congress. He's a committed single-payer candidate and running in Northern California for Lynn Woolsey's district. There just happens to be an extra 200 pieces of literature for you to pick up on your way out. These are two candidates. You don't need to go any further when you leave here today to go back to your group and say, I found a couple people that's worth looking into. Now, not all of us have the stomach for electoral politics. We understand that. So what we talk about in Progressive Democrats of America is an inside-outside strategy. The street heat we talked about last night, the work that Occupation's doing, all of the energy that's been developed outside our electoral arena. Our role as an inside-outside group, as Progressive Democrats of America, and working with you, is to connect that street heat inside the halls of Congress. When Rosa Parks sat down and simply said she wasn't going to move and began a boycott that was led by Dr. King from 1956 all the way to the Rose Garden, when Dr. King sat next to President Johnson and signed the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act, that's what this movement's about. It's a movement that said, when Elizabeth Cady Stanton began and called for a meeting at Seneca Falls, and not even in her lifetime, until 1919 when the amendment was passed, 19th Amendment for women's right to vote, but those movements were connected. We have to think of ourselves as part of a larger social movement, and we've got to help those that want to do the street heat, support them in any way we can, and for those that have the stomach, to go to your members of Congress in a disciplined, sustained manner. What the Healthcare Not Warfare campaign is about, and the last piece I'll leave you with, is to go on the third Wednesday of every month to your member of Congress and talk to them specifically about these issues. And as Don said, hold them accountable. Deliver a letter specifically asking them to comment on what it might be. Last month we asked them about McDermott's 1200, single payer 676, Conyers, Barbara Lee's bill 780 out of Afghanistan, making the connections of what the costs are. And finally, the reversal of Citizens United, Jim McGovern, Congressman Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, has what's called the People's Amendment. What better way to grow our movement than to come together to do street heat and street actions on the third Wednesday of every month together, to gather signatures, and then the few and the brave that are ready to go up into the halls and meet with those members. What better way to leave here today to commit ourselves over the course of this next year, to commit ourselves every 6 months to put together a delegation of Iraq veterans, of nurses. Who better than the nurses to lead you in a dialogue with your member of Congress on single payer? What better use of our time to build our base and to build our movement than hold our elected officials accountable and to reach out from our organizations to knock down those silos and build a social movement that includes all of us, and together we can pass single payer, we can get out of Afghanistan, and we can get on with the work that we're here to do today. That's what we're about. Any way that I can help you, I'd like to be a part of that. If you yourself want to do a brown bag vigil and can't find 5 friends, call us, email us. We'll pull up our database. We'll help connect you. Katie, over the course of the last couple of years, those of you familiar with Healthcare Now can find that logo on that website or visit pdamerica.org. Together we can make a difference. We don't have to squabble on what strategy. All we need to do today is figure out what works for you. If you want to run for Congress as a Green, as an insurgent Democrat, or you just want to do street heat and support the Occupy movement, there's room for everybody. Not just in election season, but 24/7 until we succeed in our efforts. Thank you.